I recently put a poll in my community post about which video I should do next. Ultimately, I'm not even sure if this one won, but by the time I was already starting to write it, I knew I had to make this video. I'll make sure to hit up the other ones as well, and thank you everyone who participated in that. But I want to talk about things that I missed about the 90s. Now, the thing you have to take with this is a little bit of a grain of salt, because I was born in 1991. I was barely cognitive in understanding what was going on in my surroundings. So when I was growing up in the 90s, we're going to be talking pretty much like late 90s, early 2000s. But I really wanted to talk about some of the things that I miss and kind of just reflect on those times that were, are so fond to me. So let's go ahead and get started. To kind of paint a picture of what the 90s were to me, computers were being integrated into the school system, but it still wasn't normal for a kid to have one at home. AOL was a way to communicate with friends over the internet, and if you wanted to go hang out with friends, you typically had to go over to their house and knock on their door, or call them on the phone and hope that nobody was using the internet at the time. MTV was still showing music videos pretty much almost full time, and if you wanted to watch a TV show, you needed to make sure that you knew when that show was going to be on, what channel, and what time. And that was really like how the times were, is, if there wasn't anything on TV, it basically forced you to choose a different activity. Go outside, go play with friends. I mean, I'm not saying that kids don't do that now, but with the endless streaming of just information, I could see how it would be hard for a kid to want to do anything else. The thing I want to start with, and it's something that I think just screams 90s, is literally see-through everything. See-through phones, Game Boys, consoles. I mean, anything that you pretty much had in a teenager's room was probably made with see-through plastic so that you could see the innards. And this was a really cool fad that I kind of wish would come back. I love the see-through stuff with my N64s. I wish I had the Game Boy. And, if I ever saw one of those phones, at a Goodwill, it would be really hard not to grab one. I mean, phones back in the 90s, most of them were connected to a wall and to a cord, so you couldn't just walk around with them. And some kids lucky enough to have them in their bedrooms could get these really cool see-through ones, and I just miss that kind of style that we had back then. I could be off base on this one because I don't have any teenage friends, but I feel like the room vibe back in the day was way cooler than it is now. A room really told you a lot about a person, and although most people probably had similar things, you would walk into a room in the 90s and there'd be smiley faces and yin and yang and whatever pop icon was popular at the time. It was just, the vibe was different. I remember decorating my room with book fair posters of the beetle bugs and different just things that you would just put up on the walls to kind of show your interest. Like I said, I'm not really friends with any teenagers now, but I feel like decorating your room to reflect you is probably not as cool, or I don't know, just kids aren't interested in doing it. Maybe they're just too hooked on the internet. I don't know. Something I dearly miss is the toys that were made in the 90s. I grew up playing with moon shoes. And a skip it game. And I just felt like back then, kids treasured their toys more because we used them for entertainment. We used them to display on our shelves. Toys, I feel held more value in the 90s because nowadays, if your kid gets a toy in a kid's meal, they'll probably play with it in the car. And then by the time they get home, they're already back on their tablet. And I'm not trying to shit all over new technology. It's just that toys were held to so much more value back then. With Ninja Turtles coming out and Transformers and all of these collectibles, G.I. Joes, it's how we spent a good portion of our pastime. I remember growing up playing with Polly Pockets, which I think my mom still has, Legos, Hot Wheels, and even combining all of them, making little garages with my Hot Wheels and putting my Polly Pockets and my convertibles, and just the use of imagination was just more prevalent, I feel like, back then, and more care, I think, was put into making the toys, whereas now they're just looking to make a quick buck off of a popular TV show, which you could probably argue was being done back then. But with the TV series and the freaking toys, like, I just love everything from that. I mean, you can probably tell by my game room that I'm trying to kind of replicate that feeling of these toys and display, and just really loving the shows, and having all of those things around me just makes me really happy. I don't know if you guys feel that way, but like, anyone who has kids, do you feel like do they have any toys, and do they play with them, or do you think they just like blow that shit off and go back onto their tablet or computer, or streaming the next whatever the heck is on Netflix? Let me know in the comments down below. Freaking rental stores. And I'm talking about like Hollywood Video and Blockbuster. I feel like everyone always talks about Blockbuster, but in my neighborhood, Hollywood Video was pretty much where it was at. So for the kids who are watching, which is probably none, you had to go to a store and pay money to rent a movie for X amount of days. It was usually like over the weekend for me, and that might have just been because I had to go back to school. But if you wanted to watch a newer movie and your parents didn't want to spend the money to buy it, you had to go to a rental video store, and you would walk in and there'd be movies just caked all over the walls, and you had to hope that the movie you were looking for had not already been completely checked out, because they would usually only have like X amount of copies of that particular video. And if your parents were letting you rent a video just for you, and that video sucked, too bad, you had to watch it anyway. You chose it, you're not gonna go back to the store, there's no exchanges, the money has been spent. That is the VHS tape you will be watching. And for those who don't know what VHS tapes are, use Google, because I'm not gonna explain that to you. I mean, obviously for me, one of the biggest things I loved about the 90s was video games. I mean, the consoles that were being released were just revolutionary, from Nintendo arguably saving the gaming industry, to jumping all the way to the Super Nintendo and Super Mario World, like revolutionizing platformers. I mean, that game is unbelievable. As you guys know, it's one of my all-time favorite games. The leaps and bounds from the early 90s to the end were amazing. I mean, if you really think about it, we went from like the Super Nintendo was 1991 all the way to the GameCube in 2001. I mean, those leaps and bounds from where we started, you know, Atari and before, is insane. I loved the TV shows, the games, like the culture, the gaming magazines. If you wanted to figure out how to make it through a game, you had to ask your friends, or if you were lucky enough, your parents would actually buy you a freaking guide to show you what to do. And even if you got the guide, you still had to figure some things out on your own. It's not like now where you can just pull up a video and literally watch them do it for you and then replicate it. You had to read it in a book, you had to figure out where to go. It did tell you what to do, but it didn't give away everything. And I think that's the unfortunate part about video games now, is when I'm getting stuck, you know, I look it up online and it's almost like a spoiler. Somebody literally just did it in front of me, and now I know, you know, I know exactly what to do, and I'm glad I get to move on. But I don't get to experience that for myself. And I think that's really unfortunate with games today, and YouTube, and all of this information that we have available to us. You know, back, I would say like late 90s, there was the console wars. You were a Sega kid or you were a Nintendo kid. Obviously I was the Nintendo kid, but it's just the gaming culture was so different, and back then it was actually very strange for girls to be into video games, so I definitely felt like an outlier back then. But, you know, it's not anything we're ever gonna get back. You know, with streaming, with magazines basically being dead, the 90s was like the last time that we really got to experience that kind of culture when it comes to video games.
Hey, this is Game Genie, Funkaloo, the awesome video game enhancer for your Nintendo Entertainment System. Attach it to most of your video games. Double Dragon 3 or Super Mario Bros. 3. You can go to any level, live forever, jump higher, make your own effects, and get radical firepower.
Do you guys remember like the blow-up furniture? That crap was, I wanted that stuff so bad, and I bet you if I would have gotten it, I probably would have popped it immediately, because we always had animals. I literally almost forgot my favorite part of the 90s and early 2000s was the freaking TV shows. Like Johnny Bravo, Cow and Chicken, Ed, Edd and Eddy, Pokemon arguably at the end of the 90s. I mean, Nickelodeon was in its heyday with the slime shows and freaking Hey Arnold. That was my jam. Now, going back and watching some of those shows, they had a little bit more adult content than I remember, but the freaking cartoons, man, like, I've seen some of the ones that have been released now, and they're okay. It's probably just nostalgia on my end, but I feel like the cartoons were more creative. They catered to both older and younger audiences. I was addicted to a bunch of those shows. I mean, Cartoon Network had this Toonami thing where there was a sub-story happening in between the shows. It was my first exposure to Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon. I miss those old cartoons, and I do watch them today, but it doesn't hit the same. It's probably the same thing with you guys and your Ninja Turtle stuff. I didn't get really into that. I just bought the whole series on DVD and I plan on watching it, but they were so special, and I loved the art style. I've been rewatching Pokemon again recently, the first one, and I forgot how much character Pikachu has in that series compared to what he is now. Thinking back on the 90s really had me kind of reflecting on a death of an era. I know that technology was really starting to get integrated in the 90s, but if you really think about it, you no longer have to make plans with your family to gather in front of the TV at a particular time to catch your favorite show. You can get any information on the internet about anything. You don't have to do any research. You don't have to look into any magazines. It's the death of knocking on the friend's door to see if they can come out and play because you couldn't just text them. It kind of blew my mind because that type of life will never exist again with instant streaming and all of the advances in technology. And I'm not shitting on it. It's all great things. We're all moving forward, but it kind of really blew my mind that I got to live, although very early on in my life, in a time frame that can't exist anymore. And that blows my mind. I mean, I truly do miss the 90s. If I could go back and visit it, I would. I love the culture of it. I like the colors, the clothes, the style, the music. When I was a kid, I listened to Ace of Base. That's probably one of my earliest memories. And having my little boombox and carrying it around the house, and every time that song would go on, you'd have to rush to your radio and turn it up because it was your favorite song because you didn't have a CD player and you had to wait for it to show up on the radio. But I'd really like to hear what you guys missed about the 90s. If anyone was more coherent and older during that time, what was it like going to high school during that time? Maybe you were in college by that point. Tell me down below, what did you love about the 90s? What do you miss about it? If you could go back, what would you do? I mean, for me, I think I'd try to snatch up a bunch of clearance video games. But thank you all so much for watching. I'm going to continue trying to knock out some of these videos that I put on that poll. And if you guys have suggestions on what you want to see, let me know.